The alarm on Meridian Station screamed before I even opened my eyes. Red light washed across the ceiling of my quarters, and I was on my feet before my mind caught up with my body. Something had gone wrong on the diplomatic deck, and my name was already being called over the comm. I am Ethan Cole, and on that day, I was nothing more than a junior liaison officer, the lowest-ranking human on a station built to hold 100 different species. I ran through the corridor with my uniform half-fastened, boots slapping against the metal floor, while my heart pounded harder than the alarm itself. When I reached the diplomatic deck, I found chaos. Delegates from 6 different worlds stood in a circle, shouting over each other in languages my translator implants struggled to keep up with. In the middle of it all stood a woman unlike anyone I had ever seen. Her skin held a faint silver sheen under the harsh lighting. Her eyes were a deep violet that seemed to glow from within, and she stood taller than every human in the room, her posture rigid with fury. She was Vayara Salkesh, daughter of a council elder from the Elira, a species so ancient that their written history stretched back further than most human civilizations combined. The Elira were known across known space for 2 things: their wisdom and the terrible slowness of their birth rate. Their scientists had spent centuries trying to solve a problem that threatened their very survival, and no solution had ever worked. I did not know any of this yet. All I knew was that a diplomatic disaster was unfolding in front of me, and somehow, through no choice of my own, I was about to become part of it. A young Elira attendant had accidentally triggered a translation error during a trade negotiation, turning a polite request into what sounded like a grave insult against Vayara's family line. The room had turned into a storm of accusations. Weapons were not drawn, but the tension in the air was sharp enough to cut through steel. Colonel Harlan Voss, the station commander, spotted me through the crowd and waved me over with a look of desperation on his face that I had never seen from him before. "Cole," he said, gripping my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "You speak Elira dialect better than anyone else on this station. Fix this, now." I had studied the Elira language during my off hours, mostly out of curiosity, never expecting it to matter. I stepped forward into the circle, my pulse hammering in my ears, and addressed Vayara directly in her own tongue. The room went silent. Her violet eyes turned to me, sharp and searching, as if she was trying to decide whether I was another fool about to make things worse. I chose my words carefully, apologizing for the translation error, explaining the mistake without excusing it, and offering a formal correction according to Elira custom, a custom I had only read about in old station archives and never expected to use. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched so long that I thought I had failed completely. Then she inclined her head, just slightly, and the tension in the room broke like a held breath finally released. "You speak my language," she said, switching to standard English, her accent smooth and precise. "Where did a human learn Elira customs so well?" "I read a lot," I said, and immediately regretted how simple it sounded next to the gravity of the moment. Something flickered behind her eyes, not quite a smile, but close. A human who reads, how unusual. The crisis was resolved within the hour, but the damage to the negotiations was already done. Colonel Voss pulled me into his office that evening, and I could see the exhaustion carved into his face. "The Elira delegation is furious," he said, rubbing his temples. "They almost walked away from the trade agreement entirely. If it collapses, we lose access to their medical technology, and that technology could save thousands of lives across the sector." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Elder Vashter requested you personally," Voss said. "He wants a human liaison assigned directly to his daughter, someone who understands their customs, to smooth things over during the rest of the negotiations. You're the only one who fits." I stood there for a moment, stunned. Being assigned to a council elder's daughter was not a small task. It was a position with enormous political weight and enormous risk if anything went wrong again. "Why me?" I said. "There are senior officers with more experience." Voss gave me a tired look. "Because none of them can speak her language, and because she asked for you by name." That last part surprised me more than anything else. I had spoken maybe 20 sentences to this woman, and somehow I had already made an impression strong enough that she remembered my name. The next morning, I reported to the Elira section of the station, a wing built with taller ceilings and cooler air to match their physiology. Vayara was waiting for me outside the council chambers, arms crossed, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. "So you are my new shadow," she said without greeting. "The human who reads." "Ethan Cole," I said, extending a hand out of habit before remembering that Elira greetings did not involve touch. I pulled my hand back awkwardly, and for the first time, I saw something close to amusement cross her face. "You almost touched me," she said. "Do humans greet everyone this way?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Old habits." "Interesting," she said, turning to walk down the corridor, clearly expecting me to follow. "I have read that human customs are strange. I did not expect to see proof of it so quickly." I fell into step beside her, and over the following days, our working relationship began to take shape. She was sharp, quick-witted, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from centuries of tradition behind her. She questioned everything about human behavior, sometimes with genuine curiosity, sometimes with a dry humor that caught me off guard. "Your species is very young," she said to me once, as we walked through the station's observation deck, staring out at the stars. "A few hundred years of space travel, and already you act as if you understand everything." "We don't," I said. "That's kind of the point, we're still figuring it out." She turned to look at me, her violet eyes narrowing slightly, as if reconsidering something. "That is a strange thing for a human to admit." "Would you rather I pretended to know everything?" "No," she said after a pause. "I think I prefer honesty." It was a small exchange, but it stayed with me. Over the following weeks, as the trade negotiations dragged on through endless meetings and careful diplomatic maneuvering, Vayara and I spent more time together than either of us probably expected. She began to trust my translations without double-checking them. I began to understand the subtle rhythms of her culture, the things left unsaid, the weight behind certain phrases. I also began to notice things I probably should not have. The way her voice softened slightly when she spoke about her mother, long past. The way she stood a little straighter whenever her father was near, as if bracing herself against his expectations. The way she looked at me sometimes, when she thought I was not paying attention, with something curious and unreadable in her eyes. One evening, after a particularly long session in the council chambers, she found me alone in the station's small garden, one of the few green spaces built to remind everyone on board what real soil and real plants looked like. I was sitting on a bench, staring at nothing in particular, when she sat down beside me without asking. "You did well today," she said. "The trade delegates trust you now. That is rare for a human." "High praise," I said, smiling. She studied me for a long moment. "Why does your species interest me so much, Ethan Cole? I have met humans before. None of them held my attention the way you do." I did not have an answer ready for that. The question hung in the air between us, heavier than either of us seemed prepared for. "Maybe because I actually listen," I said finally, "instead of assuming I already know everything about your people." She nodded slowly, as if that answer satisfied something in her. Perhaps that is it. Neither of us said anything else that night, but something had shifted between us, quiet and undeniable. I did not know it then, but that small moment in the garden was the first thread in something that would soon unravel everything both our species thought they understood about each other. Little did I know that the true storm was still ahead of us, and it would begin with a bet neither of us meant to make. The trade delegation from 3 neighboring systems arrived on Meridian Station 2 weeks later, and with them came a wave of formal dinners, receptions, and social gatherings that stretched long into the artificial night cycle. Colonel Voss insisted that I attend every single one, since Vayara refused to appear at any function without me standing close by as her translator and cultural guide. I did not mind. If I am honest with myself now, I looked forward to those evenings more than I ever admitted out loud. The largest of these gatherings was a mixer held in the station's grand hall, a wide circular room with a domed ceiling that displayed a live feed of the stars outside. Representatives from a dozen species mingled together, sampling food and drink carefully modified to suit each biology, while soft music played from hidden speakers along the walls. I stood near the edge of the room, watching Vayara move through the crowd with practiced grace, greeting delegates with the precise formality her position demanded. She caught my eye across the room and gave the smallest nod, a silent signal that told me she wanted me nearby. I made my way over just as a group of Elira scientists approached her, their robes marked with the symbols of the Medical Research Division. Among them was an older man named Andrek Fal, the chief scientist responsible for the Elira fertility program, a project that had consumed generations of research without meaningful success. "Lady Vayara," Andrek said, bowing slightly, "I hope the evening finds you well." "It does," she replied, "though I imagine you did not approach me simply to offer pleasantries." Andrek smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he enjoyed being caught. "You know me too well. I wish to discuss the human delegation's medical database. Their genetic compatibility research is unlike anything we have encountered before." "How so?" Vayara asked, though I could tell from her tone that she already suspected the answer would be strange. "Humans," Andrek said, glancing briefly at me, "appear to possess remarkable genetic compatibility with an unusually wide range of species. Their reproductive biology adapts in ways our researchers cannot fully explain. There are rumors across several systems of successful pairings between humans and other species, results our own scientists have spent centuries failing to achieve through artificial means." The words hung in the air, and I felt heat rise up the back of my neck. This was not the first time I had heard something like this. It was something of a running joke among human crews stationed near alien worlds, half science and half rumor, the idea that humanity's biology was strangely adaptable compared to almost every other species in known space. I had always assumed it was exaggeration, the kind of story that grew taller with each retelling. Vayara's violet eyes turned to me with open curiosity. "Is this true, Ethan Cole?" "I've heard the theory," I said carefully. "I don't know how much of it is actual science and how much is just something people say to sound interesting at parties." Andrek chuckled. "Modesty, how very human of you." He turned back to Vayara. "Regardless, the topic fascinates our research division. If the theory holds any truth, it could offer new avenues for our own fertility studies. We have exhausted nearly every other option." Vayara said nothing for a moment, but I noticed something shift in her expression, a flicker of thought hidden quickly behind her usual composure. The Elira fertility crisis was not a small matter. Their population had been declining slowly for generations, a quiet catastrophe unfolding over centuries rather than years, and every member of their society carried the weight of it in some way. The conversation moved on to other topics, and eventually Andrek and his colleagues excused themselves, leaving Vayara and me standing near the edge of the grand hall, the music still playing softly around us. "You seem troubled," I said. "I am thinking," she said, "about what he said. About the compatibility theory." She nodded slowly. "My people have tried everything. Medicine, genetic engineering, ancient methods passed down before we ever left our home world. Nothing has worked. Our population grows smaller with each generation, and our elders speak of it as though it is simply our fate." "That sounds exhausting to carry," I said. "It is," she admitted, more openly than I expected. "Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to belong to a species that does not carry this weight. Your people do not seem burdened by such fears." "We have our own problems," I said, "just different ones." She studied me for a long moment, something thoughtful and searching in her gaze. "Tell me honestly, Ethan Cole, do you believe the theory that humans are compatible with species far different from your own?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer without sounding foolish. "I don't know. I've never had a reason to test it." The corner of her mouth curved, just slightly, into something that was not quite a smile but close enough to make my chest tighten. "Neither have I." I should have recognized the moment for what it was, a line being drawn that neither of us could easily uncross. But at the time, it simply felt like conversation, curious and a little charged, nothing more. Over the following weeks, the topic resurfaced more than once, sometimes in passing, sometimes lingering longer than either of us intended. The Elira scientists grew increasingly interested in human genetic research, requesting more data, more studies, more theories. Vayara found herself pulled into these discussions more often than she wanted, given her position within the council, and I was always nearby, translating, explaining, caught in the middle of a conversation that felt less academic every time it came up. One night, after a long council session that stretched well past the station's designated rest hours, Vayara asked me to walk with her through the observation deck instead of returning directly to her quarters. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced glass, distant and silent, and for a while neither of us spoke. "My father wants me to consider a bonding arrangement," she said eventually, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "With a son from an allied council family, it would strengthen our political position." "How do you feel about that?" I asked, though something in my chest had gone tight and cold at the words. "I feel nothing for him," she said plainly. "It would be a political arrangement, nothing more. My father believes emotion is a luxury our people can no longer afford, given our situation." "That sounds lonely," I said. She turned to look at me, her violet eyes catching the starlight. "It is. I have always known my life would be shaped by duty rather than choice. I accepted this long ago." She paused. "And yet, lately, I find myself less certain than I used to be." I did not ask what she meant. I think some part of me already understood, and some part of me was afraid to hear it said out loud. We stood there together in silence, watching the stars, closer than we probably should have been, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her despite the cool temperature the Elira section of the station always maintained. Neither of us moved away. "Andrek believes the compatibility theory could be tested," she said finally, breaking the silence. "He has requested permission to conduct formal studies, pairing volunteers from both our species." "Would you volunteer for something like that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned fully toward me then, studying my face with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe normally. "Would you?" The question was not really about the study anymore, and we both knew it. I do not remember which one of us moved first. I only remember that the distance between us closed, slowly, deliberately, as if both of us had been circling toward this moment for weeks without admitting it to ourselves. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic confession, only two people standing beneath a field of unfamiliar stars, choosing something neither of our worlds had prepared us for. What happened between us that night was not part of any official study, not something recorded in Andrek's research logs or discussed in the council chambers. It was simply a choice, made quietly, between two people who had spent weeks pretending the growing pull between them was nothing more than professional curiosity. Neither of us spoke of it the next morning. Vayara returned to her duties with the same composed grace she always carried, and I returned to mine, though I found it harder than usual to concentrate on the endless stream of diplomatic paperwork waiting for me. I told myself it was a single moment. Nothing that needed to be examined too closely. I told myself the same thing for several days afterward, right up until the moment everything changed. It was Vayara who found me first, 3 weeks later, in the quiet corridor outside the medical bay, her expression unlike anything I had seen from her before. Where she was usually composed and unreadable, now her violet eyes were wide, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with you." Something in her tone told me immediately that whatever she was about to say would change everything. I led her into an empty consultation room off the main corridor and closed the door behind us, my mind already racing through every possible reason she might look so shaken. War breaking out between systems, a council conspiracy, something involving her father. I was not prepared for what she actually said. "I collapsed this morning," she said, "during my routine examination. The station physician ran tests, and then called Dr. Malin from the human medical team, and then called Andrek, and now there are 5 people standing around a diagnostic screen refusing to tell me anything until you arrive. Why me? I asked, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. She looked at me, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw real fear in her eyes. Because they believe you already know the answer. We walked together to the main medical bay, and the moment the doors slid open, I understood why she had been so frightened. The room was crowded in a way I had never seen before. Dr. Priya Malin, the station's head physician, stood beside Andrek Fal and 2 other Elira researchers, all of them clustered around a diagnostic display, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Colonel Voss stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, his face unreadable. The moment they saw us enter, the room went silent. Lady Vayara, Dr. Malin said carefully, stepping forward. Please sit down. Vayara did not sit. She stood rigid near the door, her eyes moving between the faces in the room, searching for some sign of what was happening. Tell me what is wrong with me. Nothing is wrong, Dr. Malin said gently, but something is happening that none of us expected. Andrek stepped forward, his expression a strange mixture of scientific fascination and genuine disbelief. Lady Vayara, the scans confirm it. You are with child. The words landed in the room like a physical weight. For a long moment, nobody moved. Vayara's face went pale, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to speak but could not find the words. That is not possible, she finally said. Our people require years of medical preparation to conceive. Genetic sequencing, hormonal treatments, artificial intervention. It has never once happened through natural means in recorded history. We know, Andrek said quietly. That is precisely why we are all standing here in stunned silence instead of celebrating. Every eye in the room slowly turned toward me. I felt my chest tighten, my mouth suddenly dry. Colonel Voss uncrossed his arms and took a step forward, his expression hardening into something more serious than I had ever seen from him. Cole, he said, is there something you need to tell me? There was no point in denying it. Lying would only make everything worse, and Vayara deserved better than watching me try to talk my way out of the truth in front of a room full of people. I met her eyes first, searching for some sign of how she wanted me to respond, but she looked as stunned as everyone else, still trying to process what she had just been told. Yes, I said finally, turning to Voss. There is. The room erupted into a storm of questions, half in English, half in Elira dialect, overlapping so quickly that my translator implant struggled to keep pace. Andrek moved closer to the diagnostic screen, pulling up genetic data with trembling hands, muttering to his colleagues about compatibility markers and hybrid viability, terms I barely understood even with years of exposure to Elira science. This changes everything, one of the younger researchers said, her voice rising with excitement she seemed unable to contain. Generations of failed research, and a single natural pairing succeeds where none of our methods ever could. This is not a research subject, Vayara snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise instantly. The room fell silent again. This is my body, my child. I will not be treated as an experiment. Dr. Malin raised her hands in a calming gesture. Nobody is suggesting that, Lady Vayara, but you must understand the significance of what has happened. Your species' survival has depended on solving this exact problem for centuries. I understand the significance, Vayara said, her voice still tight with barely controlled emotion. I simply do not wish to be reduced to a data point while I am still trying to understand what this means for my own life. I stepped closer to her, ignoring the eyes of everyone else in the room. Vayara, are you all right? She looked at me, and for a moment, the composed mask she always wore slipped away entirely, revealing something raw and uncertain underneath. I do not know, Ethan. I truly do not know. Colonel Voss cleared his throat, pulling the attention of the room back toward him. Everyone, I think we need to slow down. This is a private medical matter that has enormous political implications, which means we handle it carefully, quietly, and with respect for both individuals involved. He looked pointedly at Andrek and his team. That means no announcements, no reports, No data shared outside this room until Lady Vayara and Ethan have had time to process this themselves. Andrek looked as though he wanted to argue, his scientific excitement clearly at war with the Colonel's request, but he eventually nodded, though I could see the reluctance in his expression. "Of course," he said, "though I must stress, Colonel, that news of this nature rarely stays contained for long. 5 people already know. Word will travel." He was right, though none of us wanted to admit it yet. Vayara and I left the medical bay together in silence, walking side by side through corridors that suddenly felt smaller and more crowded than they ever had before. We did not speak until we reached the quiet of the station garden, the same place where our strange, complicated connection had first begun to take root weeks earlier. She sat down heavily on the bench, staring at nothing, her hands folded in her lap. I sat beside her, unsure of what to say, unsure of what she needed from me in that moment. "My father will be furious," she said finally. "A human. He will see this as a scandal, a stain on our family's political standing." "And if he does?" I asked carefully. She turned to look at me, something fierce and unexpected burning behind her eyes. "Then he will have to accept it, because I refuse to be ashamed of something my own body was somehow capable of, when generations of our scientists could not achieve the same result through every method available to them." Despite everything, I felt something like relief at her words. "So you're not upset about the child?" "I am overwhelmed," she admitted. "I am frightened. I did not plan for this, and I do not know what it means for either of our futures. But no, Ethan Cole, I am not ashamed." We sat together in silence for a long while after that, watching the artificial sunlight filter down through the garden's overhead panels, both of us lost in our own thoughts about a future that had just shifted dramatically beneath our feet. Word of Vayara's condition did not stay contained for long, exactly as Andrek had predicted. Within 3 days, whispers had spread across the entire Elira section of the station, and by the end of the week, delegates from the human side had begun asking pointed questions during official briefings. The first confrontation came from Vayara's own family. Her father, Elder Vashter, arrived on the station less than a week after the news broke, his presence announced with all the formal ceremony reserved for a council leader of his standing. I watched from a distance as he strode through the diplomatic deck, his expression carved from stone, flanked by advisors who looked equally grim. Vayara met him privately in the council chambers, and though I was not present for that conversation, I saw her afterward, and the exhaustion on her face told me everything I needed to know about how difficult it had been. "He wants to know everything about you," she told me later that evening, her voice flat with fatigue. "Your family history, your service record, your genetic profile. He speaks as though you are a variable in an equation rather than a person." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him the truth," she said. "That I chose this. That whatever happens next, it was my decision, not an accident forced upon me by circumstance." "How did he take that?" She let out a tired breath. "Poorly. But he did not forbid me from continuing this pregnancy, which is more than I expected from him, given how deeply our traditions value bloodline purity." The human side of the station proved just as complicated. Colonel Voss called me into his office the following morning, and though his tone remained professional, I could see the concern etched into every line of his face. "Command wants a full report," he said. "Not just about the pregnancy, but about you, your judgment, your conduct, whether this compromises your position as liaison officer." "Am I being reassigned?" I asked, bracing myself for the answer. Voss studied me for a long moment before shaking his head. "Not yet, but I need you to understand something, Cole. This is no longer a private matter between 2 people. It has become a diplomatic incident with implications far beyond this station. Every government with an interest in Elira relations is going to want a piece of this story." He was right, and within days, that truth became impossible to ignore. Requests for information arrived from human command centers across 3 systems. Elira scientific councils demanded access to medical data. Rival political factions within the Elira government, ones already skeptical of closer ties with humanity, began using the pregnancy as ammunition in internal power struggles I barely understood. Through all of it, Vayara remained remarkably steady, even as the pressure around her intensified with each passing day. I found myself constantly amazed by her strength, the way she faced hostile questions from her own people, skeptical glances from human officials, and the growing weight of expectation from every direction, all without losing the quiet dignity that had first drawn me to her. One evening, as we sat together in her quarters, away from the prying eyes of scientists and politicians alike, she placed a hand gently over her abdomen, still flat, still showing no outward sign of the changes happening within her. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "What happened between us?" I did not hesitate. "No, do you?" She was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes searching mine in the dim light of her quarters. "No," she finally said. "Frightened, yes. Uncertain about everything that comes next, yes, but not regretful." I reached out and took her hand, and for the first time since the chaos had begun, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "Whatever happens," I said, "we face it together." She nodded slowly, though I could see the weight of everything still pressing down on her shoulders. Neither of us could have predicted just how much heavier that weight was about to become, as the story of our unlikely pregnancy began spreading far beyond the walls of Meridian Station, into the wider galaxy, where powerful people with their own agendas were already beginning to circle. 2 months after the news first broke, Meridian Station had transformed into something unrecognizable. Where once its corridors held the slow, careful rhythm of diplomatic routine, now they buzzed with tension, rumor, and the constant presence of new arrivals demanding access, answers, and influence. A human diplomat named Corwin Blake arrived from Central Command with a mandate that unsettled me the moment I heard about it. He represented a faction within human leadership eager to use Vayara's pregnancy as proof of humanity's biological importance across known space, a bargaining chip to strengthen trade positions and political leverage with dozens of other species desperate for solutions to their own declining populations. I met him for the first time during a tense briefing in Colonel Voss's office, where he laid out his intentions with the kind of polished confidence that made my skin crawl. "This is an extraordinary opportunity," Blake said, spreading a series of data projections across the table. "If we can confirm and replicate this compatibility, humanity becomes indispensable to half the species in this sector. Do you understand what that means for our standing among the greater galactic community?" "It means turning a woman's pregnancy into a political bargaining chip," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Blake's smile did not waver. "It means securing humanity's future, Lieutenant Cole. I understand this is personal for you, but surely you can see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture involves a person," I said, "not a resource to be cataloged and traded." Colonel Voss raised a hand before the conversation could escalate further. "Mr. Blake, whatever plans Central Command has in mind, they will need to go through proper channels, and they will need Lady Vayara's consent. This station does not operate on coercion." Blake's expression cooled slightly, though he did not argue, at least not directly. "Of course, Colonel, I would never suggest otherwise." I did not trust him, and as the following weeks unfolded, my instincts proved correct. Blake began quietly courting influential voices within the Elira Council, offering trade concessions and technological exchanges in return for cooperation with what he euphemistically called the Compatibility Initiative, a research program designed to formally study and potentially replicate what had happened between Vayara and me. Andrek Fal, despite his earlier scientific enthusiasm, grew increasingly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. He approached me privately one evening in the station's medical archive, his expression heavy with concern. "I fear this has grown beyond what either of us intended," he admitted. "I only wish to understand the science. I did not intend to hand my people's desperation to human politicians as a tool for negotiation." "Can you stop it?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "I no longer have that kind of influence. Elder Vashter has grown interested in what Blake offers, despite his personal disapproval of your relationship with his daughter. Desperation makes strange allies of proud men. That revelation troubled me more than anything Blake himself had said. If Vayara's own father was willing to entertain Blake's proposals, despite his disdain for me personally, it meant the political pressure surrounding us had grown far more dangerous than either of us had realized. I found Vayara that night in the observation deck, standing alone before the wide expanse of stars, her hand resting protectively over the now visible curve of her abdomen. She had grown quieter over the past weeks, the constant scrutiny wearing on her in ways she rarely admitted out loud. "Andrek told me about your father," I said, coming to stand beside her. "About Blake's offer." She did not turn to look at me immediately. "He summoned me yesterday. He wishes for me to cooperate fully with the Human Research Initiative. He believes it could secure resources and technology that would benefit our people for generations." "What did you tell him?" "I told him this child is not a bargaining piece for political games," she said, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. "He accused me of selfishness, of placing my own feelings above the survival of our species." I felt a surge of protective anger rise in my chest, sharp and immediate. "That's not fair to you." "Perhaps not," she said, "but he is not entirely wrong either. Our population continues to shrink. If there is truly a solution within what happened between us, refusing to share it could be seen as a betrayal of everyone who comes after me." "There's a difference between sharing knowledge and turning you into an experiment," I said. "Blake doesn't care about your people's survival. He cares about leverage." She finally turned to face me, exhaustion evident in every line of her expression. "I know that, Ethan, but knowing it does not make the pressure any easier to bear." Over the following days, the situation grew increasingly volatile. Rival factions within the Elira Council began publicly debating the implications of Vayara's pregnancy, some arguing passionately for further study, others condemning the entire situation as a violation of tradition and dignity. Human Command grew more insistent in their requests for data, citing the potential benefits to interspecies relations across the sector. Colonel Voss found himself caught in the middle, fielding pressure from both his own superiors and the increasingly agitated Elira delegation, his patience visibly thinning with each passing week. "This cannot continue," he told me during a private meeting, frustration evident in his voice. "Every faction wants a piece of this situation, and nobody seems interested in what Lady Vayara actually wants." "What do you suggest we do?" I asked. Voss rubbed his temples wearily. "I suggest you two figure out what you want quickly, before someone else decides it for you." His words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. He was right. Vayara and I had spent so much time reacting to the chaos unfolding around us that we had barely paused to consider what we actually wanted moving forward together, as two people rather than as symbols in someone else's political calculations. I found her later that evening in her private quarters, seated by the window, staring out at the stars with a distant, troubled expression. I sat down across from her, taking her hands gently in mine. "Vayara," I said, "what do you want? Not what your father wants, not what Blake wants, not what Andrek's research demands. What do you actually want?" She was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes searching mine as though looking for permission to answer honestly. "I want to raise this child without it becoming a symbol for other people's ambitions," she finally said. "I want a life that belongs to us, not to politics." "Then that's what we fight for," I said, "together." For the first time in weeks, something like hope flickered across her face. "Do you believe that is possible, given everything surrounding us?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly, "but I know it's worth fighting for." She squeezed my hands tightly, her expression firming with a resolve I had not seen from her since the chaos first began. "Then we fight." The following morning, we requested a formal meeting with Colonel Voss, Elder Vashter, and Corwin Blake together, determined to make our position clear before either side could push the situation any further out of our control. It was a risk, confronting powerful figures from both our worlds directly, but remaining passive had only allowed the pressure to grow heavier with each passing week. As we walked together toward the council chambers that morning, Vayara's hand resting lightly in mine, I felt a strange mixture of fear and determination settle over me. Whatever happened in that meeting would shape not just our future, but potentially the future of relations between our two species for generations to come. Neither of us knew exactly what we were about to face, but for the first time in weeks, we faced it as equals, united, rather than as pieces being moved across a board by people who saw us as nothing more than symbols in their own ambitions. The council chamber felt smaller than usual when we entered, though I knew the room had not changed. Elder Vashtor sat at the head of the long table, his posture rigid, his expression carved from the same stone as always. Corwin Blake sat opposite him, calm and composed, a thin folder of documents resting neatly in front of him. Colonel Voss stood near the window, arms crossed, watching everything with the careful attention of a man who understood exactly how fragile this moment truly was. Vayara and I took our seats together, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence stretched heavy across the room, filled with weeks of accumulated tension, finally reaching its breaking point. "I assume," Vashtor said finally, his voice cold and measured, "that you requested this meeting to formally accept the Compatibility Research Initiative." "No," Vayara said, her voice steady and clear. "We requested this meeting to end the discussion entirely." Blake's calm expression flickered, just slightly. "Lady Vayara, I understand your concerns, but the potential benefits of this research extend far beyond." "I know exactly what the potential benefits are, Mr. Blake," Vayara interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut through his practiced diplomacy. "You have made them abundantly clear over the past several weeks. What you have failed to acknowledge is that this is not a resource to be studied and traded. This is my body, my choice, my child." Vashtor's expression darkened. "Vayara, you speak as though our people's survival is a small matter, easily dismissed for the sake of your personal feelings." "I speak as though I am a person, Father," she said, her voice rising with an emotion I had rarely heard from her before. "Not a solution to a problem our scientists have failed to solve for centuries. If there is truly value in what happened between Ethan and myself, then let it be studied through proper means, through willing volunteers who understand exactly what they are agreeing to, not through pressure placed upon a single unwilling participant simply because it is convenient." I watched Vashtor's jaw tighten, the muscles in his face working as he processed his daughter's words. For a moment, I thought the conversation might collapse entirely into the same hostility that had defined every previous exchange between them. "There is another option," I said, before the silence could stretch any further. Every eye in the room turned toward me. "Andrek Fal has already expressed serious reservations about how this situation has been handled. What if the research moved forward, but properly, ethically, with volunteers, with full transparency, and without turning Vayara into the centerpiece of a political negotiation?" Blake leaned forward slightly. "That would significantly slow the timeline Central Command is hopping for." "Maybe it should be slower," Colonel Voss said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. "Mr. Blake, I have watched this situation spiral further out of control with each passing week, because everyone involved has been more concerned with speed and advantage than with doing this correctly. If there is genuine scientific value here, it will still hold value a year from now, conducted properly, rather than rushed through under political pressure." Blake's composure faltered slightly, and for the first time, I saw something like calculation cross his face, weighing the political cost of pushing further against a room clearly turning against his position. Vashtor remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on his daughter with an intensity that made the room feel even smaller. "You are certain," he said finally, "that this is truly what you want, not simply rebellion against my wishes, but a genuine choice?" "I am certain," Vayara said, without hesitation. "I love this child already, Father, and I love the man beside me. I did not choose this path lightly, and I will not allow it to be reduced to a bargaining chip, regardless of how desperate our circumstances have become." Something shifted in Vashtor's expression then, subtle but undeniable. the rigid mask of political authority giving way, just slightly, to something more personal underneath. I had never seen him look at his daughter with anything other than expectation and disappointment, but in that moment, I saw something closer to reluctant respect. "Very well," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "The research initiative will proceed only through voluntary participation, properly conducted, without political pressure attached. And you," he said, turning his gaze toward me, "will be expected to formally acknowledge this child before our council, according to a Lyra tradition, if you intend to remain part of my daughter's life." I met his gaze steadily. "I intend exactly that." Blake, recognizing that the tide of the room had turned firmly against his proposal, gathered his documents with practiced composure. "I will relay this outcome to Central Command," he said, "though I suspect this will not be the last conversation we have on this matter." "Perhaps not," Colonel Voss said, "but it will be the last conversation conducted this way." Blake left the chamber without further argument, and slowly, the tension that had gripped the room for weeks began to ease, replaced by something quieter, more fragile, but undeniably hopeful. The months that followed were not without difficulty. Andrek's research continued, slower and more carefully than Blake had originally intended, built upon genuine volunteers rather than political pressure. Some results proved promising. Others remained frustratingly inconclusive, a reminder that even remarkable events did not always yield simple answers. But through it all, Vayara and I found something steadier beneath the chaos, a life slowly taking shape around us despite everything that had tried to pull it apart. Vashter never became warm exactly, not in the way I might have hoped, but he softened, attending medical appointments alongside his daughter, asking careful questions about human customs he had once dismissed entirely. Colonel Voss remained a steady presence throughout, shielding us from the worst of the political maneuvering whenever he could, and even Andrek, despite his early enthusiasm, became something of a quiet ally. Ensuring the research surrounding us remained grounded in genuine science rather than political ambition. I remember the night Vayara went into labor with a clarity that has never faded, the urgency of rushing through the station corridors, the controlled chaos of the medical bay, the exhausted, radiant look on her face when it was finally over, our daughter cradled gently against her chest. We named her Lyra, a name that held meaning in both our languages, a small but deliberate symbol of the two worlds she carried within her. Word of her birth spread quickly, exactly as we had expected, but this time, the story that traveled across the systems was different from the one Blake had once hoped to create. It was not a story about political leverage or scientific triumph. It was simply the story of two people who had chosen each other, despite everything standing in their way, and the small, remarkable life that choice had brought into the galaxy. Standing in the quiet of that medical bay, watching Vayara hold our daughter for the first time, I thought back to that chaotic first day on the diplomatic deck, the shouting delegates, the translation error, the moment her violet eyes first met mine across a room full of tension neither of us could have predicted would lead here. I had come to Meridian Station as a junior liaison officer, unremarkable and uncertain of my place among the vast complexity of interspecies politics. I never expected that a single moment of honesty in a language not my own would set into motion a chain of events that would challenge two governments, reshape a family's expectations, and ultimately give me something I had never imagined I would find among the stars. Vayara looked up at me then, exhaustion and joy mingling openly across her face, our daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together." I sat down beside her, taking her hand in mine, and for the first time since the chaos of that first alarm had pulled me from my quarters months ago, I felt something settle quietly into place. Not the end of complications, not the resolution of every political tension still simmering beyond the walls of that room, but something steadier, something real. A beginning, chosen freely, by two people who refused to let the galaxy decide their story for them.